In this episode of Satansplain, we'll hear a satanic anecdote from a musician on manifested success, with some thoughts on popular self-limiting actions that can get in the way of that. Then, on the other end of reality, I'll share a series of messages I received from a mystic trying to educate me on Satanism and Enochian. It may be a learning experience for sure, but not in the direction he expected.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain. Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. As you regular listeners of the show already know, we have a recurring segment where I'll read an anecdote from a Satanist, or in some cases I'll give my own satanic anecdote. Usually I save those for after the commercial break, but in this episode I've decided to just do things a little differently, and we're going to start the show with this Satanic Anecdote segment, or as we call it for short here on Satansplain, the Satanecdote. Cue the Satanecdote theme song.
Satanic Anecdotes. Satanecdotes.
This Satanecdote comes from Mark. Mark says, I would like to share my story of how a ritual produced a notable result in my life. I am a blues musician here in New Zealand and am regularly asked to play at a Sunday afternoon blues session in town, which is a 2-hour drive away. I love playing music, so the travel is not an issue for me. However, the audience is never really that enthusiastic, no matter who is playing. That, in itself, does not bother me, but it's always nice to play to an active crowd. Needless to say, sometimes when I play there, I don't quite feel it. The Satanic Scriptures has a number of rituals within its excellent text, one of which is a dedication ritual. I wanted to dedicate some new ritual tools I had acquired and decided that it would be good to include my guitar in the collection. The ritual was conducted weeks ago, and last Sunday was my first live performance since. And it is fair to say that the performance was one of the best I have ever played. The whole set came alive. A crowd appeared from nowhere and really got into the music, and since Sunday I have had a number of messages saying what a great afternoon they had. From my perspective, I believe I played with more grunt and dedication than before, but I also believe that the power of the ritual inspired me to be the best player I can be. The number of follow-up gigs are piling up. It's looking good. Thanks for taking the time to read the post. Hail Satan. And that concludes Mark's Satanecdote. Thank you for sending that, Mark, and I can certainly relate to a lot of that as a musician myself. Sometimes an audience is just dead or apathetic. Sometimes it's hard to put yourself in the proper frame of mind for great results. So when it comes time to deal with those sort of self-transformation things and harnessing the emotions in a self-beneficial way, what can Satanists do? What can we do? Well, there are lots of things we can do, as there are lots of things people in general, Satanists or not, can do. Some of those things, though, are arguably going to give less desirable results than others. Sometimes people in a situation like that will try to ease off things by reaching for a distraction. They'll change their emotions by hitting the bottle or a bong or a video game. And the key word here is distraction, because I'm definitely not condemning indulgence. Indulgence is good. Material pleasure is great. As a Satanist, I have to say that even escapism and the sin of sloth can be great. But I would also argue that if you're going to do things for distraction and sacrificing any and all long-term indulgences entirely for the short-term ones, then you may not be doing a good job as a Satanist of being your own god and applying foresight to really get what you want in the end. I like eating cookies much more than I enjoy paying my bills. But yeah, it would be stupid to think that as a Satanist, this means I'm going to just eat cookies and never pay my bills. That might be fun in the short term, But, yeah, having my credit cards shut off, my utilities shut off, and all that doesn't sound very desirable to me in the end. Not really much of an indulgence. Not very self-serving. So that underlying concept could be its own Satansplain episode topic, really. But let's get back to this Satanic Anecdote and the idea of changing yourself and the things around you in some non-mundane way. What else do people do in that kind of situation? Well, some people pray. They'll pray to a deity. Do we do that as Satanists? No, of course we don't. Deities do not exist. Satanists are atheists. And even if you knew that already but wanted to take this theatrical approach of transferring all feelings of responsibility to an external being, well, that just seems rather pathetic to me. Not to mention all apprehensive with this whole approach of, oh, help me, please, oh, great external being. Oh, God, if it's not too much to ask, I'll do some self-sacrificing. If it is, I'll recite this prayer this many times. I'll dance for you because self-sacrifice must be the key to getting what I want. No. That's just groveling. There's nothing satanic in that. That kind of action might give people a temporary feeling of relief, like you've shifted the burden elsewhere. But then we're back to the distraction problem, aren't we? All right, so how else do some people deal with these kinds of situations? Some people take the opposite approach and try rationalizing everything. They think as long as they can come up with some convincing enough argument that sounds good in their head, sounds good for not wanting what they really want, that the emotional part will go away. Like the fable with the fox and the grapes rationalizing defeat. Okay, but that's still defeat, I would argue. You don't necessarily have to always accept defeat, especially if you fancy yourself your own god. Now, being rational has its place in the day-to-day world. I didn't condemn being rational, just as indulgence is its own satanic virtue. But when either of those become more about hypocritical self-deceit than rationality or indulgence, then I say it's time to stop and reevaluate. So what is something a Satanist can do that isn't any of those not-so-satanic approaches I listed? Well, a Satanist can utilize satanic ritual. It doesn't have to be a completely formalized ritual necessarily with the candles and all the works, but there is something psychologically powerful here in knowing what you want and using self-transformative psychodrama to that end. Let's break that term down, self-transformative psychodrama. Self, that is you, your own God. Transformative, well, you're changing your state, and with that, how things will happen, or which things you'll perceive happening around you. You're changing your emotions there. Psycho, no, that doesn't mean psychotic. Psycho is a prefix that means mind, in this case, and this is your mind power at work. Emotion, nothing supernatural, and your unconscious mind connected to your thinking mind. And finally, drama, that means a decidedly emotional theatrical context. Psychodrama, self-transformative psychodrama. So when Mark did this, was it self-deceit and distraction from what he really wanted? I would say no. Was it some sort of apprehensive, groveling, supernatural call? Certainly no. Was it an attempt to talk himself out of what he wanted? No. If you want to understand more of what Mark did, I would say read the second half of the Satanic Bible. Reread it, even if it's been a while. I reread it myself every now and then. You can also listen to Satansplain episodes number 48 and 49 on the topic of Satanic Ritual. All right, that is my little rant on all of that. Having said all of that, I'm going to completely shift gears now and spend the rest of the episode sharing my correspondence with an entirely different person. Not the sort of person who thinks he understands Satanism philosophically, but rejects the ritual part based on false assumptions, but the opposite. The so-called Satanist who seems to reject the philosophy while taking the ritual part in mystic directions where it wasn't intended. First, let me say that here on Satansplain I receive emails and other messages, and most of these questions are really good questions. They're the kinds of questions whose answers I think can benefit not only the person asking, but other Satanists as well. And even Satanists who know Satanism quite well might like to hear my perspective on things. I know that I myself like to hear what other Satanists I know say on different topics, whether that's hearing another Church of Satan member in an interview or reading an article that they wrote or whatever. But then, of course, I get the occasional messages from people who are not so sincere. I don't mean the occasional hate mail I get from Christians or spam from spammers or requests from people in Nigeria who say they want to join the Illuminati. Those examples, they are actually all sincere if you think about it. It seems to me. Now, I'm talking about messages from people who think they understand Satanism and are convinced I simply have it all completely wrong, and they want to send me their hot take. They want to educate me. They want to Satansplain Satanism to Satansplain. And I'm not claiming to have all the answers in life or that other Satanists can't have different takes than I do on certain topics. We can debate and disagree and all that stuff, but well, I'll just let this example all speak for itself. Even in cases like this, though, I do have to say, hey, the silver lining in all this is this could be a good learning opportunity for this person trying to Satansplain Satanism to Satansplain. Could be a good learning opportunity for other listeners. Just the learning experience might not be what the writer expected. So if you're wondering why it's going to take the rest of the episode to go through this or why I'd spend this much time with one person, well, I think a lot of that comes down to the sad fact of reality that loaded questions are always simple to ask, but often take a long time to dissect for an appropriate answer. So as always, I'll try to give some timestamps in the description of this episode for chapter breaks if it's too much to take in all at once, or if you want to skip around. For those of you on locals.com or who check into the Satansplain.com website, you may have already read what I'm about to share. I interject a few extra things. I posted about it in those two places, but anyway, here we go. Devi Shemuremit writes, Hi, I am founder of the Mosque of Satan, and have recently got around to reading your Satanic Bible, after about 10 years since first downloading it, in order to compare any of our differences or similarities. All right, just stop right there. There is just so much in this opening sentence, so much to unpack. Where do we even begin? Here's somebody who illegally downloaded the Satanic Bible, and I know the act was illegal because to date, the publishers of the Satanic Bible have never authorized an electronic version yet. I wrote a whole essay you can read on churchofsatan.com called Why a Free Satanic Bible Isn't Satanic, where I go into more details about this. But whatever, let's put that point aside. I don't like that it happens, but it does happen all the time. So let's assume also that what they downloaded is the actual Satanic Bible and not some random PDF of stuff that somebody uploaded and named the file the Satanic Bible, or, took the Satanic Bible and altered a copy of it, because I've seen things like that floating around the interwebs. So we'll assume this person's bootleg copy of the Satanic Bible is accurate. Okay, let's get to the more interesting point here. Devi got a hold of the Satanic Bible, which I'd say is the definitive book on the religion of Satanism, but then he didn't read it. He left it sitting on a hard drive for a decade, and during that time, he said, you know what, I'm going to found a new organization of Satanism and call it the Mosque of Satan. So, it's like the Church of Satan, but with a different house of worship name in the first word. And after then, and only after then, decided to read the definitive book on the topic he had lying around for a decade, and as we'll soon see, possibly didn't read any parts of it besides the supplementary ritual material in the back pages. So I have to ask, what other religion does this happen in? Do other religions have this issue? Is there somebody who says, I'm going to found a new organization for Christianity. I'm going to call it the 7-Day Vedic Temple of Jesus. And hey, now that I've done that, I think I'll open up that copy of the Holy Bible I bought 10 years ago, and I'll read it now. Or I'll just read the Book of Psalms. And then I'm going to contact the Vatican to say, hey, I noticed that, like you're also a Jesus church, so I'm curious how this little organization of yours, called the Roman Catholic Church, differs from my organization, the Seven-Day Vedic Temple of Jesus. I don't know. Maybe Christians do get people like that. I don't know. But in any case, I'm sure you see the pretentiousness here of the opening sentence I read to you. So anyway, let's put that aside and just keep reading. Quote, my particular interest was in the language used for the Enochian keys, since in our Mosque of Satan, we have what I have since come to believe may actually be the Atlantean language. I'm assuming that by Atlantean language, he means the language of the alleged lost city of Atlantis, not, as somebody mentioned in one of the Satansplain threads, the language of Atlanta, Georgia. Anyway, in our Mosque of Satan, we have what I have since come to believe may actually be the Atlantean language. Whether it actually is or not is irrelevant. Nonetheless, I have gone through step by step in my most recent esoteric-themed podcast on YouTube, uploaded in 2022, exactly how I arrived at each letter or syllable, parentheses, transposing 2 chakras down via use of chakra vowel sounds and consonants in order to reach the feminine inversion of originally masculine recitation. However, no such explanation is given with your Enochian keys. Are we really expected to believe that someone heard voices, then jotted down what these revealed? By the way, I am recent a subscriber to your Satansplain channel. Okay, so that was the rest of the message. Now, when I first received this message, the thought crossed my mind that, yeah, I could just lash out at this person. I could call this person just one of countless other pseudo-Satanists who set up a channel somewhere on social media and fancied it a new satanic organization, even though he clearly doesn't understand Satanism and couldn't even be bothered to buy the Satanic Bible or read it within a decade after downloading it. But no, I figured, no. Let's not take the mean approach in a reply back. This person maybe seems sincere, even if they're a little woo-woo. You know, this isn't a malicious message that was sent to me. Let me just try a polite reply. So here's what I wrote back. Hello, Devi. I've never heard of the YouTube channel Mosque of Satan and can't seem to find it or any info on it. Anyway, there is no authorized electronic version of the Satanic Bible, the foundational text of Satanism, so whatever version you downloaded a decade ago is an illegal bootleg, so I don't know if it's an accurate copy or says something the book doesn't actually say. You can read more about that in my essay here, and I gave a link to my essay on churchofsatan.com, why free satanic Bibles on Satanic. As for somebody, quote, hearing voices and jotting things down, well, that sounds like what practically any mystic or founder of any theistic religion has done. Satanism is a non-theistic religion, and as a Satanist, I know that notions of entities like demons or gods are fictional creations of humans. I believe the same about Atlanteans, since there's no real evidence of a place called Atlantis. Regardless, as the Satanic Bible explicitly states in its introduction to the keys do trace back to what was published by John Dee and Edward Kelly, which went through translations by different groups over the years. As the Satanic Bible states, what is presented is, quote, an archaic but satanically correct unvarnishing of the translation employed by the Order of the Golden Dawn in the late 19th century. So LaVey took what the Golden Dawn had used back then and offers a more satanically moving translation that better works within the psychodramatic context of Satanic Ritual. Likewise, as also it says in the Satanic Bible, quote, the barbaric tonal qualities of this language give it a truly magical effect, which cannot be described. As stated earlier in the Satanic Bible regarding the esoteric nature of the original Catholic Mass in Latin and how its English translation removed that esoteric quality to it, LaVey says, quote, it is much simpler to obtain an emotional reaction using words and phrases that cannot be understood than it is with statements which even the simplest mind will question when hearing them in an understandable language. Thus, I see no reason why a Satanist would need some sort of letter-by-letter translation of Enochian. And finally, I provided a link to an article from churchofsatan.com written by Anton LaVey. It's called the Enochian Pronunciation Guide. But it has a lot more than just pronouncing Enochian. And I supplied a quote from the essay. I said, as LaVey also points out in the following essay, quote, I find most annoying the person who demands a word-for-word translation of the keys, not realizing that they are virtually like pidgin English in the lack of grammatical nuance and literary style. If they were to be translated literally, you may be assured that the chanter would sound most inarticulate. Okay, so that was my first reply back. Was I maybe kind of smug in that? Well, okay, maybe. It's me. But not completely lashing out. I wasn't completely nasty, I would say. So I get a second message. The second message begins with, I recall downloading it from the actual Church of Satan website. Okay, well, that can't be true, but I'll say more on that later, continuing with the message. But my Mosque of Satan is not traceable via Google search for some reason, despite that 2022 podcast actually being called Mosque of Satan, since having changed it to Nezreg of Satan to avoid people of a low intelligence clicking on it. Here's a direct link to that most recent podcast, by the way. And he gives a link. Well, maybe the reason it doesn't show up on the first page of a Google search is because could be nobody really visited it. It uses words that are already bringing up thousands of other unrelated results and so on. If you were to search Mosque of Satan, I'm sure you would probably find some anti-Islamic propaganda stuff from Christians and so on. Continuing on with the message. But after sending my initial message earlier on, I was reminded of the Roman Catholics having taught the Prophet Muhammad, and then in brackets, H-A-E. I don't know if that's supposed to be like a peace upon him kind of thing or what. Anyway, I was reminded of the Roman Catholics having taught the Prophet Muhammad, H-A-E, techniques for the invoking of divine revelation. And similarly, our friend John D., undoubtedly a Freemason or something, possibly having access to similar such techniques. But I far from doubt in the power of these keys, my particular interest being key 7, despite having similar satanic zikhr techniques of our own, Z-I-K-H-R. Okay. All right. So there's all this like mystic woo-woo stuff. Again, I could have taken the harsh road and replied back with, Devi, where are you going with this crap? And how the hell do you work the Freemasons into this? Never mind the Catholics teaching stuff to the founder of Islam or what, But no. I decided just to correct the more obvious mistake. I also figured, well, Satanism is not some kind of ecumenical religion, and there's no logical reason to consider my thing and whatever this is to be two different denominations of the same religion. They clearly aren't, but Satanism doesn't have the monopoly on the Enochian keys. They've been around long before that. So if some theistic kind of person likes the Enochian keys for some mystic reasons, okay, so be it. Maybe I could find some kind of middle ground here. So I wrote back to Devi with this. Devi, the official Church of Satan website has never made the Satanic Bible available for free download. As I explained in the article, there are very good reasons why we would never do that. Maybe you got it from a fake website claiming to be the Church of Satan. Those things show up from time to time. Anyway, glad to hear that you enjoy the keys. I use the ones from the Satanic Bible, and I do find the Enochian sound very moving. The end. Well, I thought that was maybe the end. I thought that maybe this pseudo-Satanist might then be off on their merry way, parting on good terms, kind of realizing, okay, yeah, we don't believe in the same things, but yeah, okay, we can at least agree that the Enochian's kind of cool, so yeah, take care. No. The onslaught of passive-aggressive solipsistic lunacy came in the third message to me. And I think we really need to take a quick break before we get into that, so let's do that right now. Stay tuned. You are listening to Satansplain.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
The Metro with your host, Reverend Jeff Ivins, where I play post-punk, new wave, and other hits from the 1980s. Get it at radiofreesatan.com. Satansplanetwork.com. Hail Satan.
Handmade, all-natural, botanical perfumes, soaps, and ceremonial incense, sculptures and jewelry to adorn yourself and your other altars. All this and more await you at moonandsunemporium.com. Ritual perfumes and other occult fine art luxuries, created and curated by me, Priestess Sarah Josephine Clark, with tarot readings by Reverend Dr. Dylan Clark. moonandsunemporium.com.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. Visit the main website for the show at satansplain.com. There you can find every Satansplain episode. You can also listen to Satansplain on Spotify, YouTube, Audible, and a host of other places. If you are on social media, please give Satansplain a like and a follow, or whatever the equivalent is, on Facebook, X, and YouTube. Likewise, if you're listening now on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button for this episode. For all questions and correspondence, email me directly. The address is bill@satansplain.com. That's the email address. If you enjoy Satansplain and would like to support the show, please go to the show's page on Locals. Point your web browsers to satansplain.locals.com. You can sign up for Locals for free, but you can also additionally become a paid subscriber there. That is the best way you can support Satansplain. Though we also have a merch store. You can go to store.satansplain.com for that. And thank you, as always, to all of you who support the show in one way or another. And I have to make a quick Satansplain correction here. Depending on how you get Satansplain or hear about Satansplain on social media and the like, you may have seen the previous episode number 94, mistakenly being labeled episode 95 in some places. That was a typo on my part. That was my mistake with the headline for the episode. I type that in some places. There's a distribution company that I pay for who ends up putting the word out in different places and, putting the podcast on Spotify and on YouTube and on this place and that place. And unfortunately, that number got copied over in a couple places. So, bit of confusion. I'm sorry for that. The episode with the prank call was number 94. And this one you are listening to is now 95. And with that, let us get back to the correspondence I got. The third message to me from Devi of the Mosque of Satan starts with, the date I downloaded the Satanic Bible was August 2015, with your memo being dated 2014. Okay, the date on which he illegally downloaded the Satanic Bible and the date of my article doesn't change the fact that he still illegally downloaded it, and wherever he downloaded it from, it was definitely not churchofsatan.com. And never mind the fact he seems to be basing his beliefs on something that isn't Satanism, but we'll get more into that later. Next paragraph. But I was not asking for a word-by-word definition with the Enochian keys, since a translation has already been included, which is sufficient. What I was asking was the truth on how each letter and syllable was arrived at. Well, just to stop and answer this, my answer is I have no idea what sort of process Dean Kelly may have used to construct the Enochian. I know what the reports about them say, and as a Satanist, I don't see why I would really care. The keys' occult mystique gives them a certain novelty, which, combined with the language's tonal quality and their themes varied and vague enough to cover a variety of different ritual themes, all simply make the keys, for me, good for the psychodrama of Satanic Ritual. I don't have a problem with people who are curious and want to pursue more about the origins of these keys. You could even be a Satanist and still do that. But I don't see what the point is aside from maybe satisfying a personal curiosity. And again, nothing wrong with that. But I don't see how that's really applicable to Satanism. And for those of you listening, as many of you probably already know, I talked about Satanic Ritual and its role in Satanism before. I've done more than a few episodes on the topic. Again, as I mentioned earlier, check out Satansplain episodes number 48 and 49 for some answers on that. And now, here is where Devi takes a sharp turn into passive-aggressive foil hat land. In fact, this is so insane, I'm just going to read the rest of the message resist the urge to comment to it along the way, and then after I'll break it down line by line with my rebuttal. As you notice, I sometimes when I do, mocking people, I do like a fake kind of silly voice, and I'm not even doing it for this. I'm just going to just let it speak for itself this time. Here we go. What I was asking was the truth on how each letter and syllable was arrived at, and have since learned via further research that the writers of these keys may have been attempting to decipher the then thought to be lost Book of Enoch, which, as we know today, can be found preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox, what seems to be a Judaic take on the Book of Revelations. Could it therefore be that your organization is really Judaic and only posing as satanic for purposes of deception? Or are your people merely comfortable operating around Jews, about as comfortable as I would feel operating around Muslims or Rastas, perhaps due to some Judaic ancestry? I personally find Jews rather unsettling, Judaism being deemed first of the patriarchal religions, which took over from the goddess matrilinear in 2600 BCE for the purposes of inverting worldview at the time towards the patriarchal. Yah, Jah/Yah, Yah, also deemed as fallen under Satanism, us also going by the maxim/adage, the fallen always wins. Which leads me to the point of a major difference that seems to exist between us, i.e., your organization seeming to portray Satan in the masculine! Though again, this could also be deception. But the truth is that all religions began in the East, and the origin of the word Satan is pre-vedic term for Shakti, having been derived from vowel sound and consonant of sixth main chakra, the most potentially feminine chakra. Moreover, in Islam, when someone has been deemed or labeled satanic, this usually implies that individual displays traits or attributes which are feminine. I therefore conclude that in proper Satanism, we have sworn allegiance to the goddess Lucifer Satana, and here Devi inserts a bunch of Arabic and the words most high, most exalted, goddess of life and true creatrix of the entire universe, each of those letters in the word capitalized, via the same pledge/initiation given under my satanic-themed playlist. All right. So that was the third message. Can it get any more insane than that? Well, here was a follow-up Devi wrote before I even made any other replies. By the way, only Islam can have Satan as fallen, a weak point for the other two main religions, who don't know the name of their own fallen. But I tell you that for Christians it is Allah, derived from vowel sound and consonant of the most powerfully male chakra. And in your organization's portrayal of Satan as masculine, perhaps indicating that, if not Jews, then you are perhaps Christians? Okay, we're done. So that is the insanity. Those are the rest of the replies. That's where the messages end. Again, didn't respond to any of them, not directly. If you need to pause the episode and get a stiff drink to deal with what you just heard, well, go right ahead. Otherwise, let me quote that all back line by line and give you my response. We start at the top. And have since learned via further research that the writers of these keys may have been attempting to decipher the then thought to be lost Book of Enoch, which, as we know today, can be found preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox, what seems to be a Judaic take on the Book of Revelations. Could it therefore be that your organization is really Judaic and only posing as satanic for purposes of deception? Well, Devi, my answer to this is no. No, because the question is so embarrassingly loaded and so laughably absurd, I don't even know where to begin. It's simply built on a stack of unsupported premises and non sequiturs. Of course, I do routinely run into anti-Semitic mystics who make ignorant claims just like that. But let's break down the underlying premises and conclusions within the question. Let's really dissect this. The question, to word it another way, is, does this connection of the Enochian keys to the Book of Enoch mean that the Church of Satan is really Judaic and not satanic, and is merely pretending to be satanic in order to deceive the public so that they don't figure out we're really Judaic? Okay. Well, again, within this question, I've counted so much wrong. I've counted no less than 6 premises and 2 conclusions asserted from those premises. So if you remember from the 2-part episode of Satansplain I did quite a while back on logic and fallacies, if you heard that, I talked about how with logic you have premises, which are the statements you assume to be true, and you build your argument off of that, that to reach new logical conclusions, and you get fallacies when the logic doesn't really flow. So again, let's dissect this. The first assumption under that whole question is that the Book of Enoch is part of the religion of Judaism. Okay, let's call that premise number 1. Premise number 1, the Book of Enoch is part of the religion of Judaism. Premise number 2, that Dee and Kelly somehow derived their Enochian keys with their letters and symbols from the Book of Enoch. A third assumption that has to be made here, let's call that premise number 3, is that some variant of the Enochian keys was later used by the Golden Dawn, and some variant on that is used in the Satanic Bible, the main text of the Church of Satan. Well, that premise I think we can agree on is accurate, but let's continue breaking down the original question. Devi's fourth underlying assumption in the question is that anybody who would utilize the Enochian keys must believe in something about them mystically, the angels, the speaking animals, etc., etc. So Devi uses all of this to draw the first conclusion of his, that the Church of Satan's belief system is based on Judaism. Now, in the second half of the same question, Devi asks if this is being done for purposes of deception. So we have a fifth assumption here, namely that it's better for public relations to be seen as explicitly satanic instead of being seen as Jewish. And then there is an assumption number 6, which is that the Church of Satan has an interest in saying and teaching the precise opposite of what we say, or what we secretly believe, and turning away people who express beliefs of what they allegedly secret believe in as an organization. Okay, thus Devi arrives at this second conclusion, that the Church of Satan secretly embraces Judaism and is only pretending to be Satanist to trick people so they don't figure that out. Okay, so to recap, Devi is arguing that the Book of Enoch is part of the religion of Judaism, and Dee and Kelly somehow derived the keys from the Book of Enoch. The keys made their way in some form to the Satanic Bible. Therefore, the religion established by the Church of Satan is some form of Judaism, the religion of the Jewish people. Furthermore, Devi argues that we're trying to keep this aspect secret because we don't want people to think we're bad. So, for better public relations, we decided to call ourselves the Church of Satan. All right, now at this point, I'm sure anybody of even reasonable intelligence can see what's wrong with all of this, but again, let's break it down. Premise number 1, the Book of Enoch is part of the religion of Judaism. That was the claim. Is this even true? Well, the short answer I would say is no. The Book of Enoch is considered non-canonical in Judaism, from what I've read, and in conflict with the Torah. There are lots of scrolls like this, which rabbinical Jews will say, well, maybe some Hebrews wrote this, but we don't consider it actual Jewish scripture. I mean, you see this in other religions too. Like in Christianity, there are some books that existed but didn't make the cut into the Bible. The books that make up the Holy Bible were decided upon in the 4th century by a committee called the Third Council of Carthage. You can look that up. There was a Gospel of Thomas, for example. There was a Gospel of this and that didn't make it into the Bible. Now, it's true that you might find some of these Jewish or Christian denominations, far-out sects that are more on the fringe and do accept the Book of Enoch or accept the Gospel of Thomas or whatever, but they would be the exception, not the rule, to those religions. So already, the connection of the Book of Enoch to the actual religion of Judaism is already really weak. It's weak enough to refute the whole claim of the Satanic Bible being Judaic. But by the way, as for this claim about the Book of Enoch being a Jewish take on the Book of Revelation from the New Testament, no, the most recent parts of the Book of Enoch are still dated as being around for about 200 years before the earliest known writings of the Book of Revelation. So no, I think we can safely say the Book of Enoch is not a take on the Book of Revelation. They're both apocalyptic in nature, but that doesn't make one a copy of the other. Let's continue. The second premise, as I pointed out, that Devi is making in the question is that John Dee and Edward Kelly somehow derived their Enochian keys from the Book of Enoch. Well, there really is no evidence for this. I suppose there's a chance Dee might have gotten a hold of some pieces of the Book of Enoch, but it wasn't really circulated around Europe for another few centuries from what I've read. The language certainly doesn't resemble any of the Semitic languages like Aramaic or Hebrew that the book may have been found under. Third premise that Dev has to make in his loaded question is that the keys that Dee and Kelly came up with eventually went through translations and to occult groups like the Golden Dawn, and then LaVey took them for the Satanic Bible and gave them his own spin. All right, well, that one is true. That's true, but the fourth premise I mentioned is that Devi assumes the only possible use for Enochian is a mystical one, with literal beliefs in the sort of, being the translations referring to. And this, of course, is incorrect. As I said, the role of the Enochian keys in Satanism is a purely ritualistic one, and even then, purely psychodramatic. They're not satanic theology. So in summary, this conclusion that the Church of Satan is somehow practicing a Judaic religion is absolutely absurd. Devi bases this accusation, and the fact it's worded as a question doesn't make it any less of an accusation, really. Don't give me that, I'm just asking questions. No. He bases this accusation on a stack of things that don't connect. We Satanists do not treat the Enochian keys as some kind of sacred words from literal angels. The composers of the Enochian keys did not get them from the Book of Enoch, and the Book of Enoch is not considered part of the religion of Judaism. So there you have it. This argument couldn't be any more wrong. So even if we assumed Dee and Kelly got their Enochian from the Book of Enoch somehow, and even if we also assumed the Book of Enoch was part of the canonical Hebrew scriptures, so what? Satanism utilizes mythology from all sorts of sources. I did 3 episodes of Satansplain on our book, The Satanic Rituals, showing that we do this. It's still mythology. We recognize it as such. The infernal names in the Satanic Bible are another example of how we utilize mythology from all around the world. We don't limit ourselves to the Judeo-Christian mythos, let alone the Judeo-mythos. All right, with that out of the way, let's look at Devi's underlying 5th and 6th assumptions. I pointed out that these were first assuming that it's better for public relations to be seen as explicitly satanic instead of being seen as Jewish, and that the Church of Satan has an interest in saying and teaching the precise opposite of what it secretly believes and turning away people who express beliefs of what they allegedly secretly believe as an organization. Okay, thus, Devi concludes that the Church of Satan secretly embraces Judaism and is only pretending to be Satanist to trick people. All right, do I even have to explain the absurdity of this one? All right, first of all, as Satanists, we have no problems rejecting Judaism as a religion. As a Satanist, I reject all spiritual religions. I am my own God. I am not a servant of the God of the Hebrew Scriptures, aka the Old Testament. I therefore take no shame in condemning Judaism as a religion. But think of the profound amount of ignorance and bigotry it takes to think that if you make some connection between Satanists and Jews, then you've somehow succeeded in smearing Satanists. Just, think about that for a second. Satanism is an explicitly adversarial religion. As the name shows, we're not looking for mass approval. The Church of Satan does rightfully correct misinformation about Satanism, but that's another thing. We are not some kind of anti-defamation league, and as again, that would be inapplicable to an explicitly adversarial religion, which we established and call Satanism. I talked more about all this conspiracy theory crap in Satansplain episodes 88, 89, and 90. Okay, and finally, this idea we hear from lunatics like Devi who think that the Church of Satan secretly believes in this thing or that thing, and we're just saying we're atheists, saying the exact opposite. Do they ever try to follow through on the logic of this one? Why would we do this? So, for example, conspiracy theorists say, oh, the Church of Satan says they're atheists, but, when you get up to the higher levels, they teach that Satan is real. Okay, so let's assume this is true. Imagine this. The Church of Satan routinely gets idiots all the time approaching us and saying, I want to join you. I am a Satan worshiper. I hear the voices of Satan in my head, and I want to sacrifice animals to him. And to them, we always say, no, you're an idiot. You're insane. We do not view Satan as a deity like that. Go away and seek a mental health professional. And then you have Satanists like me, Church of Satan representatives who write articles and run podcasts and do interviews where we reiterate those atheistic beliefs, those points on what we do and we don't believe, explain that we're not devil worshippers. There are even Satanists who are not official representatives of the Church of Satan, maybe not even members of the Church of Satan, but they've read the Satanic Bible and they do know what Satanism is and isn't, and when misinformation comes up, they'll go correct people. They'll do those things as well, correct information that's out there when they run into it. But apparently these conspiracy theorists believe that when you reach a high enough degree in the Church of Satan, which would have to be degree 4, magister or magistra, because there's only one degree higher than that, degree 5, and that's just the high priest and high priestess who holds those. But these people think, apparently, that when I became a magister, High Priest Peter H. Gilmore took me aside and said, hey, Bill, we really like the job you've done with explaining Satanism and applying this whole non-theistic philosophy in your life in all of these different ways with, this much success. Well, you're so wonderfully devoted to this, Bill, that we'd like you to stop all of it and believe in the exact opposite. Continue your great work explaining that Satanism is non-theistic and telling these crazy devil worshippers to get lost. We don't want people who are already devil worshippers to join us. No. We want to wait for people like you who really establish themselves in the stuff we tell people what we believe, are really atheists and all that. And now that you've done that, we want you to start believing the exact opposite now. No, that doesn't happen. That didn't happen. That can't happen. And you have to be profoundly stupid to think it does happen. Likewise, you have to be profoundly stupid to think that my beliefs are secretly some kind of Jewish mysticism and that I'm just using satanic imagery to deceive people. All right, first of all, if I really liked Jewish mysticism, why wouldn't I just join some Jewish mysticism group? I could join a group that teaches Kabbalah or whatever. I'm sure I could find one. I could go buy some Kabbalah books from Amazon, join a Kabbalah social media group, and then an actual organization or whatever. But I don't do that because that's not what I believe. I am a Satanist. I am not a Judaic mystic. What Satanists believe is what you see explicitly written in the Satanic Bible. And that sure is not Judaism. Again, our beliefs are completely antithetical to Judaism, as well as the other spiritual religions of the world. But on top of all that, how stupid do you have to be to think that publicly calling ourselves the Church of Satan is some kind of PR move to make sure that people don't think we're evil? If anything, Judaism seems to be the religion that gets the most overwhelming amount of sympathy by default. It is socially unacceptable to criticize Judaism, whereas Satanism is the one religion where it's fully socially acceptable to bash, since, hey, it's Satan. Again, I'm not trying to play the victim card here. I'm just showing the absurdities in the accusations here. All right, pause for a sip of water. Still going. Well, I've gone this far. Let's continue with Devi's message. I promise I can refute the rest in far fewer words. Continuing with Devi's message, quote, "Or are your people merely comfortable operating around Jews?" And in parentheses, about as comfortable as I would feel operating around Muslims or Rastas. Close parentheses. Perhaps due to some Judaic ancestry? All right, to respond to this, first of all, what does comfortable operating around really mean? Satanism is not an evangelical religion, and most Satanists are fine with keeping their religion private. The fact that a Jew is less likely to fly off the handle upon hearing the word Satanist than a Christian might seems relevant to me. As for Judaic ancestry, this doesn't make any sense either. Again, one would have to be profoundly ignorant to think that Satanism has theological roots in Judaism. A simple look at the Old Testament and the Satanic Bible show that the two religions, Satanism and Judaism, are fundamentally incompatible. If by Judaic ancestry Devi means Jewish ethnicity, then the question makes even less sense. An overwhelming number of members of the Church of Satan, just like an overwhelming number of people in the world in general, have no Jewish ethnicity. Ethnicity has nothing to do with whether two religions are compatible anyway. I don't know why this is so hard of a concept for some people to grasp. The next part of the message was Devi saying, "I personally find Jews rather unsettling." Okay, well, that sounds like a you problem, not a Church of Satan problem. I have to wonder with people like this, how many Jews have they actually met, if any? I suspect not many. Or maybe the few he met were of the hardcore Hasid variety, I don't know. But I think Devi is from the UK and seems particularly keen on being friendly with Muslims. Even though, again, Islam is just as antithetical to Satanism as Judaism or Christianity is. Maybe this is where a lot of his anti-Semitism is coming from, I don't know. Next sentence, Judaism being deemed first of the patriarchal religions which took over from the goddess matrilinear in 2600 BCE for the purposes of inverting worldview at the time toward the patriarchal. All right, is this whole thing true? Well, it was obviously the first of the three Abrahamic religions. Judaism is much older than Christianity and Islam. But I am not a feminist and thus don't view the world in terms of patriarchy. Not to mention that some feminists believe the Greek and Roman pagan religions were patriarchal and call those the first patriarchal religions. And here we get to the second stupid, not as stupid as the first, but still stupid conclusion from Devi. Quote, "Which leads me to the point of a major difference that seems to exist between us, i.e. your organization seeming to portray Satan in the masculine, ! Though again, this could be deception." Or, gee, Devi, maybe, perhaps more likely, you're just jumping to erroneous conclusions based on false premises again. But this sort of solipsism we see with some pseudo-Satanists is off the charts in this case. These sorts of pseudo-Satanists who don't really bother to learn what Satanism actually is in the first place, but then somehow feel the need to create a whole new satanic organization for the world. And then approach us as if they're somehow equal in stature to the Church of Satan and ready for some sort of, ecumenical discussion. So the Church of Satan was the first in history to establish an actual codified religion calling itself Satanism. And for any people out there who'd call me a gatekeeper, well, you're damn straight I am. And people like Devi are a good reason why I should be. Go listen to Satansplain episode number 71 to learn more about this notion on different denominations of Satanism and why that's a myth. But let's actually look at this notion of Satan and the character's gender. Well, whether you're a Satanist or not, you know that Satan in the zeitgeist is a male character. You know, in movies and pop culture, even religious literature and so on, we see Satan referred to as male. It doesn't mean there haven't been any female portrayals of Satan in pop culture or perhaps occult lore. Think of the movie Bedazzled, for example. But of course, when people generally make references to this mythical character known as Satan, again, it's as a he and not a she. Once again, though, I have to mention the infernal names. You know, that list of mythological beings which is in the book Devi illegally downloaded but never got around to reading until 10 years after the fact, forming the Mosque of Satan. But in the infernal names, you will see names of both gods and goddesses. Never mind the fact that, for example, a naked woman sometimes serves as the altar for satanic group rituals. So if you are a Satanist and you're looking for some kind of female archetype or feminine dynamics that you want to incorporate into your psychodrama for the ritual chamber or some other aspect of Satanism, and you identify as a Satanist, well, the options are already there. They're right in the same books. So no, the difference between Devi and myself has nothing to do with the gender of Satan. The difference between Devi and myself is that I am a Satanist, and Devi comes off as some mystic with more than one screw loose, I gotta say. All right, let's try to finish up addressing the rest of Devi's messages. Quote, "But the truth is that all religions began in the East, and the origin of the word Satan is pre-vedic term for Shakti, S-H-A-K-T-I, Shakti? I don't know. Well, to the first part, I say no. Cultures all over the world ended up developing some kind of religion or another. Religion is hardly limited to the Abrahamic ones. Religion is a very human construct, and again, has been independently developed in one form or another, wherever you've had humans. As for the claim about the word Satan coming from the word Shatki, no, this is incorrect. Satan comes from Hebrew and it means adversary. Maybe Devi hates this fact and is desperately trying to distance herself from anything remotely Jewish or Hebrew, no matter how mundane the linguistic connection may be. But Hebrew is an Afro-Asiatic language, as I see, whereas Sanskrit is Indo-European, as it's classified. So I've seen no evidence that these two words would share the same etymological origins. So in layman's terms, the two words are from two languages that developed completely away from each other. And the next line is more of this weird pandering to Islam bullshit. Quote, "Moreover, in Islam, when someone has been deemed or labeled satanic, this usually implies that the individual displays traits or attributes which are feminine. I therefore conclude that in proper Satanism, we have sworn allegiance to the goddess Lucifer Satana." Well, first of all, yes, Devi, Muslims say a lot of stupid shit. There have been lots of lingual translations of left to the feminine or sinister and so on. Most people would see this connection with satanic and the feminine and see it as sexist against women, you know, as religious propaganda literally demonizing women. Now, female Satanists can certainly take the ironic and mocking approach to that and say, well, if women are these powerful seductresses of lust and that's satanic, then hey, hail Satan, let's take that label of shame and wear it as a badge. But no, that doesn't seem to be what Devi is doing here. Devi thinks that the Church of Satan is patriarchal, but this Muslim shit isn't. Go figure. As for this claim that what Devi is doing is proper Satanism, well, obviously it's not. Swearing allegiance to an imaginary friend is not Satanism. You are just taking goddess worship and desperately trying to fit the label of Satanism on it because you like the term. You should find a more apt label for your belief system, since Satanism is a well-established religion and your beliefs simply don't match it. Perhaps you should look up, I don't know, Luciferians or dark paganism. I've heard of that before. Even being a goddamn Wiccan would probably be more accurate. All right, well, my voice is getting hoarse, and that is more than enough time spent on this set of messages. We got through the end of it. Hopefully, I've helped turn it into an entertaining learning experience for everybody. So let's end the episode here. Thank you. Thank you all for listening. And until next time, hail Satan.
You have been listening to Satansplain. For more information about the show, visit the official website at satansplain.com. And for more information about Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode, copyright 2025, Magister Bill M.